Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Behavioral Grooves is about building a community of people who are interested in the applications of behavioral science to work and life. We do this by sharing our discussions with interesting and insightful guests on a variety of topics that involve why we do what we do. And they almost always turn out to be quite fun.
Yeah, they pretty much do. In this episode, we spoke with Thomas Steenburgh, Senior Professor of Business Administration and Senior Associate Dean at the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. Tom partnered with Mike Ahearne.
Mike Ahearne, we did an episode with him back in June of 2018.
Yes, Tim. Yes, we did.
It was great.
So Tom partnered with Mike Ahearne on some groundbreaking research, which was recently published in the Harvard Business Review on how to help sales reps be more successful when they are asked to sell new products. Tom and Mike invested 5 years into gathering data from sales managers, salespeople, and even customers. The insights they gained were interesting and especially valuable for those working in sales leadership positions.
One of their discoveries is that the best asset for a sales rep to have when it comes to selling new products is a learning mindset. Tom describes a learning mindset as one where the rep is naturally motivated to discover more about the client and their situation. As intuitive as that sounds, it's a lot less common than we imagine.
It turns out that reps with a learning mindset spend more time discussing the market trends, the situations, and the specific needs of their customers before they start selling the new product. This deep investigation into each customer's situation helps reps become more successful in the long run. However, it also takes more time and reduces output while they're doing that investigation. Sales managers who are anxious to keep the numbers up from month to month may struggle with this. Tom highlighted some ways to work around this in the short term.
Yeah, Tom also highlighted a big disconnect between sales reps and their customers and how they perceive the strengths of the reps. When rating this rep's strengths, it turns out that customers tended to rate sales reps very differently than the reps rated themselves. The only dimension that reps and customers agreed on was on the sales rep's product knowledge.
We all know that introducing new products is a must for a company to grow, but it's also hard on the reps. It requires sales reps to be change agents within the organization as well as their own selling methods. These changes can cause significant emotional challenges, a component that has been undervalued by organizations in the past.
We also talked about the importance of strategic account reps with their broader viewpoints and longer-term orientations and how they can be leaders in the new product introductions. Of course, we also discussed music and Tom's eclectic tastes.
If you like what you hear in this episode, please take a moment before the end of today, that's today, really, today.
You really mean today?
I think so. I would love to see a whole bunch of reviews, short reviews, go out today.
Today, not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow.
Today.
Yeah, and they can be short as a tweet. It goes a long way to help us in the ratings, and it means a lot to Tim.
And you.
And me, yes.
Okay. Also, if you're interested in talking with Kurt and me about the work that we do, helping companies with sales compensation, sales incentive structures, and selecting the most motivational rewards, don't hesitate to start a conversation. Kurt can be reached on Twitter at @whatmotivates, and you can reach me at @thoulihan. We'd love to help your organization improve your bottom line with a behavioral lens.
Please sit back with a fine listening beverage and enjoy our conversation with Tom Steenburgh.
Welcome, Thomas Steenburgh, to the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it is our pleasure.
We are excited about this. So, we got introduced to you from Michael Ahearne, who we had on a podcast earlier, but you guys just recently wrote an HBR article called How to Sell New Products, Focus on Learning and Not Performance. So we just thought it would be a good way to start if you told us a little bit about some of the findings from that and what that article is saying.
Yeah, I think that the basic findings of the article are around what's different about selling new products from selling existing products. So really the thing that we were interested in was learning more about really new to the world products, not product line extensions. What are companies doing differently?
Okay.
And so some of the big picture stuff is that companies probably aren't doing a third of what they should be doing in selling new products,
Yeah.
because really what happens with new products is it's a very different sales process. Different types of people excel within that process, and then organization structures need to be built to support people in this type of sale. And it's some of the surprising things for us were really around how little companies were doing, and also probably from a personal perspective, the thing that surprised me most is how much of a salesperson's emotions play into the sale, and how it's very different than other types of work that they do.
Okay. Well, can you expand on that? So you're
Yeah.
talking about the emotions and how they play into the sale. So specifically, how do those emotions play in selling a new product versus an existing or a product line extension?
Yeah. So let's think about a normal salesperson's life, or what they normally do. Is that you might be meeting with a customer frequently, you might know them really well, um, but if you don't have new products, you don't really have that much to talk about after
Mm.
a while. So new products actually are this great opportunity in your mind, because you think, wow, I can break through with a conversation. I have something new to talk about. It's going to ease the tedium. And so as people approach the sale, it has two sorts of behaviors, let's say, that people exhibit. One is because they have something new to talk about, they actually just talk about the product itself. And it's almost like, just go run on and on about all the features and all the things that you don't normally do in selling a new product, in selling a normal product.
Right.
You do in selling a new product, it's very counterproductive with the account. And some of that is just excitement with the salesperson. They have something new to talk about. So there's this great old study done by Neil Rackham. Um, and what he showed is that when people are selling existing products, they actually ask many more questions about the client and what's going on in their business than they do when they're selling new products. When it's new products, it's all about, oh, I'm going to tell you about all the features and just go on and on about the product information,
Yeah.
which doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, but the excitement sort of gets the best of people.
Yeah. So that excitement of having something new to talk about ends up actually detracting from talking more about the need that the customer might have, or some of the background around that, and then they get right into talking features and buttons and and bells and all that kind of stuff. Is that
Yeah,
yeah.
that's exactly right. And if you look at other types of behaviors that often happen when the reps go out to sell a new product, they don't discriminate amongst customers all that much.
Wow.
And so it's a widely spread type of message. And so
Okay.
that initial excitement though actually turns into sort of frustration, or people would describe about how they had the rug pulled out from under their feet later in the sale, because a lot of times the customer really isn't all that interested in buying. And
Okay.
so when we talked with customers about new sales, sometimes they talk about how basically they just want to know what the latest and greatest thing in the market is, and so they'll talk to anyone. They're actually super open to talking to the salesperson at this point in time, because they can learn something. So a senior vice president buyer that we talked to said, I'll talk to anyone because I'm just looking for new ideas. But very rarely buy, but I will talk to anyone because I need to know what's happening in the industry.
Yeah, but there are some things that there are some aspects of both the personality and the sales process that can make selling new products more effective.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Uh,
So give us a couple of insights on those fronts.
yeah, it's so behaviorally, uh, one of the things that turns out to be really effective when selling new products is somebody who has more of a learning mindset. And so
Okay.
this is really hard in a sales organization. So if you think of, how we manage most salespeople, it's quarter to quarter, make your quota.
Right.
There of places to work in a firm, it's probably the place that has the most focus on performance.
Yeah.
But the salespeople who are most effective at selling new products actually have more of a learning orientation. And this has some negative consequences, because early on, after a new product is launched, what the most effective salespeople do is they go and really learn in the account. And what that means is they spend more time meeting with cross-functional teams. They may spend more time in face-to-face selling, which new product sales require. And what happens to performance due to this investment in time is that it dips immediately after product launches. But these people in the long run, after they learn about how to sell in the account, they learn what the customer is really interested in, their performance goes to a higher level in the long run. So the investment is worth the time. And
Uh-huh.
we contrasted that with salespeople who had more of a performance orientation mindset. And what happened with these people is they're always focused on making the numbers. So their performance didn't really dip in the short run. In fact, they're more likely to keep, more focus on their existing product portfolio and less focus on the new product portfolio if they're selling both. But in the long run, what that meant is that their performance didn't rise to the same level. And, from a managerial perspective, the only thing I can say is this is really tough.
Yeah.
Because what you're asking a manager to do is say, well, forego some sales today, and trust me, it'll happen in the long run. And good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's a tough message. But so what it means from a managerial perspective, you really have to be dwelling in that earlier part where right after launch that sales are dipping, that the reps actually are out there learning and spread knowledge at that point. Work to find best practices.
Right. And it's interesting too, because you think, at least in the companies that I've worked with, the new product launch is this opportunity to take that sales up to the next level. At least that's what the executives are talking about in various different things. And the incentives around it are usually built around that quick start as well. And what you're saying is it's almost counterintuitive to say, well, actually in the long run that may have a slower uptake might lead to longer term success if you
Yeah.
you do that. Is that not putting words in your mouth
Right.
there, right?
I think a more focused effort around a set of customers who are really willing to adopt the new products and invest in that sort of process are the ones that do best. And I think that one way to think about it is we'll often talk about change management within a company and how difficult that is, even to execute within your own company.
Right.
Essentially, what we're asking salespeople to do here is act as a change agent within the customer site. And so what that means is I have to be more focused. I have to find the right customer, someone who's open to change. I have to think through the incentives of all the individual players at the client site, anticipate the hurdles and the roadblocks, and develop strategies to help the customer change. It's a really tough job.
Yeah, so the qualifying component of working with the customers in order to qualify them and to get them, there's a lot more work going into that. And I know in the article you talk about it's just that 32% more time face to face and 32 or 35% more time in meetings and various different things. So that whole process of getting to know that customer just is a lot longer and more intensive than what had been done for maybe a traditional or a existing product.
Right. No, it's exactly right. And for some of these products, again, we really wanted to study new to the world type of innovation. And what you're asking the customer to do is to change the way that they're doing business.
Yeah.
So that's everybody has trouble changing. So it's
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, yeah.
Well, and I love the story you told about the customer who said, "I'll take any of those meetings because I want to learn what's new and out there, but not necessarily with the intent to buy." And so,
Yeah, I don't want to do it.
They're more like vampires.
so when you think about that, and you're like going as a salesperson, you're excited because wow, I got all these new potential people that are wanting to talk to me, but the reality of it is they're just out there searching for information, not really in that buying mode. So
Yeah, and that's exactly why they describe it as having the rug pulled out from under your feet. It's like you like suddenly my funnel is full. I have all of these opportunities. The world is rosy, and then you look 3 months later after you invested this time, and you're like, oh, wait a second here. What just it's the worst thing on earth.
Right.
Yeah, and particularly for salespeople, typically they're it's like wow, I've just spent 3 months and what do I have to show for it? So
because the sales manager is going to be asking, what do you have to show for it?
right.
Well, so when it comes to having this, very performance orientation versus a learning orientation, organizations need both, right? I mean, the sales manager needs to have people who are selling that have a learning mindset to pick up those new products. But as the performance orientation, that's an important mindset as well, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And so I mean some interesting things as you develop a team, it's really a portfolio of people, right? It sort of gives you some indication of how you might have them allocate their time. We talked to plenty of really what I would describe as a star performing rep with the average portfolio who basically says when it comes to new products, I'll just wait a year.
Oh,
wow.
And so they have this mindset. I need to make my numbers. They're really good at making my numbers. When I did incentive comp at Xerox, we'd have people, let's say, that spent or that for 29 out of 30 years would have made President's Club level performance. I mean, these people that are people you could not stop if you wanted to.
right.
Well, that person might say, "Yeah, I'll wait till somebody else learns how to sell that product because I'm going to make my number this year." Let them invest the time, and then once they learn it, I'll adopt all those practices.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you conducted the research. What was how did you go about? Obviously, you had to find companies with new to the world products and various different things. But how tell us a little bit about the process that you did for the research.
We did a whole bunch of things. This project took a lot longer to complete than either of us thought when we started it. It's probably about 5 years of
Wow.
went in. Not all the time, obviously, but a fair amount of time. And we did a lot of one-on-one interviews. We did it with sales managers and salespeople, and we also did it with buyers. We conducted a couple surveys with sales reps to sort of get at, how does your time allocation change? How does your process change? And we did a couple of studies with sales forces at a Salesforce level where we did some profiling of the reps within the company, did competency assessments within the company, and then also had customers do a competency assessment of the reps. So we had these pairs of people, and that led to some really interesting findings.
Wow. Well, can you talk more about that? I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where you've had customers provide an analysis or an assessment of an individual sales rep, where you also had the sales rep's own individual assessment of themselves. How did that go? And well, how did it work? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, so it was really fascinating and very telling about behavior, I think, in the accounts. So what we did essentially was had people ask questions or answer questions about themselves to get insights into their mindset. Are they more performance oriented or learning oriented? Are they open to change? Do they have knowledge of the product? Are they adaptable? Do they have market knowledge? These sorts of characteristics. And then we'd ask the customer, like, how do you see the salesperson along these dimensions? And this is what's fascinating. I think it gives you it gave us a very clear insight into how companies behave as well. Um, so the only dimension which the salesperson's perceptions of themselves and the customer's perceptions really matched was on product knowledge. So when you ask those two groups, like, does the rep have a lot of product knowledge? The answer to that question was pretty close. It's like, yeah, they have lots of product knowledge, which is, at some level that's good because that's what companies train. They give product training. That's it.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
When you had then compared, like, do they have a learning mindset or a performance mindset, or do they have, are they adaptable? And that's the one that struck us the most, right? This was totally fascinating to us. When you asked the rep if they thought they were adaptable, many of them thought, yeah, I'm pretty adaptable. I understand how things change and I can go with it. And when you ask the customer, they said, this is the least adaptable person on earth.
Oh my gosh. No way.
It was awesome, right?
Blind spot bias. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was great.
Wow.
And so it's just sort of gives you this sense of, as we were doing the research, like, really the things that companies should be training has a lot more to do with behavior or mindsets of the rep, the emotions of the rep, than actually the product knowledge itself. Product knowledge is not the problem in these situations. In fact, the best reps uh, think about this very, very differently, are worried about different things. Best managers sort of help the reps in different ways. I could talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, go on that. Expand upon that. How to train and where the focus should be.
Right.
Yeah. So one company that we worked with and talked to a senior manager there is in the digital advertising space, digital media space. And he talked about some of the struggles he was having getting their reps to sell into this new marketplace. And it was an awesome conversation, in part because the initial training that they had done for the reps was like every other company. And basically, they gave them specific product knowledge about this digital content that they're trying to sell, and the training wasn't effective at all. And when he stepped back and looked at the problem and interviewed the reps, what he realized was that the reps actually in this situation were having a really hard time having any conversations with the customer at all. They didn't want to put themselves out there. They basically didn't want to look dumb, right?
Right.
In front of the customer.
Save face.
Yeah. And so they stick to what they knew, which is the product itself, not talk about market trends, not and if they could avoid the discussion, they would. They just sell the old products. And so then his solution to the problem was different. It was very unique. One of the things that he had his reps do was do journaling, to talk about what their fears were in front of the customer, to sort of say, well, just talk through what's going to happen,
Right.
there. And another thing that they asked the reps to do was to say, write down what your job is and what your job isn't, which is just a way of making the problem smaller, right? It's to manage your emotions, not manage the sale. And so then the second wave of training had things also that were knowledge based, but it was more market focused. This is how the market's changing. This is how you can make yourself appear as well, not appear, but actually be a leader, a thought leader in the space. But then here are other things that you need to do to control your emotions through the sale. And that's actually the stuff that worked. And to me, that was just fascinating. Like I'd say if I had one thing that I took away from this experience of doing the research was I was not prepared for how much therapy people had to go through. Like the emotional side of it. I don't know. I didn't expect that
Well,
before we started.
It sounds like there was this component of fear that the sales reps had, again, around their self-identity and that looking bad in front of a client or not knowing what they needed to know. And so that journaling exercise and as you said, identifying what their role is and what their role isn't, is really just looking at, so here are the pieces that you need to understand, and here's some things it's okay not to understand, and just get through that and help them overcome some of that fear and that saving face kind of component. So
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. It's overcoming fear.
yeah.
So what? So Tom, this is. I just want to clarify, make sure that I'm understanding that managing the emotions of the sales reps came through sort of therapeutic methods. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want go that. Like I use that in a lay person sort of sense. But yeah, I mean, that's how I took it. I, and I think anything that people do that's new, like when with my job as a business school faculty, when we bring new people into the school, a lot of what your job is to help them cope, is just help them make sense of what's happening, like make the problem seem smaller. And you saw a lot of that in this environment. It's like anyone who's doing something new has this. It's obvious in retrospect, but but it's clearly not obvious to a lot of companies because they provide none of the support and resource to their salespeople.
Yeah, it's always about learn the product, feature, top to bottom, all the features, be able to spew off all of the, the bits and bytes and all the specifics and how it compares to the competition, and then you're on your own.
Then you're done, right?
Yeah.
And you're obviously not done in this type of thing, right?
Well,
But
you talked about it earlier about change management, right? And being able to identify, salespeople have to go through that themselves. They have to change how they're approaching some of this stuff, and that's not always easy. And so you have to address that as an organization and really think about what is going to be, to your point. We can train them on the product, we can train them on the features, but we have to also get them to be able to say, hey, yes, I need to change my behaviors, and how do I go about doing that effectively? And so
it's really,
retrospectively you go, duh, but in the heat of the moment. So
well, and I think it's hard, and I don't want to diminish the problem in a sales force, because as we talked about earlier, it is one part of the organization. It's very numbers driven, and failure is not really an option. But when you're doing new things, you have to celebrate failure in a way. And so there's that contradiction, I think, that makes this a harder problem to deal with in a sales organization than it is in other parts of the organization.
Yeah.
In the article, you guys talk about the benefits of strategic account management. Can you talk a little bit about some of what you learned about that and how that plays into selling new products?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of benefits of strategic account management. And if I were to think about, how its applications changed over the last 25 years, if I were to describe the types of programs you'd see 25 years ago, they were much more geared towards cost reduction, and now it's geared much more towards selling of innovation, both
Okay.
creating of innovation and selling of innovation. So in the article, we talk really about the sales side. And let's go back to the challenge. One of the challenges in selling a new product is that you're asking the customer to make changes. What that means at the customer site is that people have entrenched motivations. They've built up an empire. They want to continue to grow their engineering group, that sort of thing. They may not have incentive at the customer site to talk to one another. So the really effective strategic account management programs that we saw sort of cut across business divisions, both at the customer site and at the seller site. And they would make connections. They built this great network. And another thing, because they had the network that they could use from that, is that they can anticipate problems. They can anticipate where power dynamics might be changing at the customer site, and they get in front of that. If you had product line reps only, they're in a much smaller world. They don't know about those connections at the customer site. They can't anticipate that stuff. And so they have to start, developing those to even get started in this new product. You almost, just making the task a lot harder. The other real advantage of strategic account management, although even this is amusing in some ways, is that strategic account managers typically have a longer term focus than an ordinary rep. So if ordinary reps are worried about, quarter to quarter, strategic account managers might have multi-year planning horizons that they look over. And so they have less of a need, let's say, of making this quarter's numbers. We did a different set of research around earnings management and how companies manage earnings. When you looked at the pressure that companies have put on strategic account managers relative to the normal sales force to make quarterly numbers, it was much less. It was actually the one part of the sales force that they wouldn't jerk expenses away from. So that long-term mindset actually is something that's really helpful in selling new products. So there's lots of reasons why that part of the organization is effective, not only on the product development side, but also on the sales side in getting new things adopted.
Well, I'm curious about, we get to talk to a bunch of, we get to talk to academics, people who have spent most of their careers in academia and researching. We spend a lot of time in our podcast talking to practitioners, and we love that as well. You cross both, you were at Xerox, and now you're in academia. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your personal journey to go from someone who's practicing and working on strategic sales incentives to the work of studying them and getting your PhD and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I do have an interesting career. I feel like I've lucked out in many ways. So when I always knew that I wanted to teach. My dad taught at a community college and was the academic dean there. My uncles were all in big business. Board level people who had terrific careers there. And this is, I guess, my way of combining those two things.
That sounds good.
Your family history led you to where you are.
Right. That's right. It's my way of making sense of the world. But I'd spent some time at Xerox. I actually loved my job there. I worked for great people who let me gave me a lot of autonomy and do interesting work. My last job, I was responsible for the U.S. direct incentive strategy for the U.S. direct sales force. So we spent like $140 million on just incentives for about 4,000 salespeople. And so we developed these compensation plans. We would support them through the year. You got very good at sort of explaining the company's strategy because pay focuses the mind, and people often were not happy with us.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So you got good at sort of understanding why the company was doing what it was doing, and your one safe haven in life was to explain how the strategy made the customers' lives better. And the reps were never happy with you if they lost pay, but they could understand why you were doing something, and the noise would be bearable if you could do that. And I got to be like about 30, and I realized if I didn't leave, Xerox then, I would never leave because the money was good. They were offering me great opportunities for advancement. But I really wanted to teach and do research. So I left. I did a PhD at Yale. And then I was at Harvard for 8 or 9 years. And now I'm at the Darden School. So I've really been lucky to be part of some really great organizations. And I've learned a ton along the way.
So Tom, what are some of the fun or interesting topics that you're looking at now? What research are you doing that you're just really excited about where it's going and various different things?
So we have a paper coming out soon about managing low performing salespeople and some of the challenges associated with that. We allude to some of that research actually in our old sales motivation article.
Right.
Uh, so that's something that's interesting. I've
And it's
been
not just the GE model of lopping off that bottom
Yeah,
10%, and that's not
actually this particular program did have an element of that in it. So it's called I forget what we call the paper finally, but it's, I think it's called the bench effect or something like
okay.
that. But the basic idea, we did a field experiment with a study, and basically this company had never laid anyone off in ages,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Which is unusual in sales, but
Yeah.
they'd have stories about how the reps would help each other, and it was countercultural to lay people off. And then a new sales manager came in and said, "We would like to run a program to that will get rid of some of the deadwood," as he described it. And they put in a program where basically they had they'd hire a trainee into the company and put them in a district, and then they ran a program where if you were the lowest performing rep and you missed your quota, then you within a sales team, you would be out and this new person would come in and take your job, which is very harsh.
Yeah.
wow,
Um,
just
you know,
extremely harsh.
I'm
Wow.
not, and I should be clear, I'm not recommending the companies.
Okay, okay, good to know. Yeah.
uh, but what you saw was like because they didn't have much performance management at the company before this time, you saw an immediate spike in performance, 5% spike basically in sales, and it
Wow.
maintained throughout the year. So it wasn't like people were shifting business across time periods. It wasn't that people didn't know how to do their job. There's basically some shirking that went on. And they ran the program for a year, and then they only ran it at part of the company, let's say a third of the territories, and the other third or the other 2/3 they left alone. Um, and they stopped to see what happened. Tens of millions of dollars basically to the good they made with this program. And the interesting thing is, the CEO and the vice president had a chat after that year and said, "Okay, we're not going to roll this out to the other territories. This isn't. This is so countercultural to who we are. Is I don't like how it's going to change the company."
Yeah.
So they found other ways to manage performance. But it's to me, the study is interesting in a number of ways. One is I do believe that you have to have practices in place to manage low performers. I can talk a little bit more about that as well, but it also has to fit within the culture of your firm. If you talk to some of the high performers at that firm that were in those territories, they were almost like, "Thank God somebody's doing something about this."
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
But it still is very harsh, a harsh practice. So finding ways though that get people out of the business that shouldn't be there, really don't belong in sales, but also is respectful of the culture is critical.
Right.
And so if I can just say one other thing about performance management and what I've seen with top sales managers is that the really good sales managers move that whole performance curve up. It's not just that they focus on the low end and they're good with the laggards, or not just that they focus on the stars and they're good with the stars. They get everybody to levels of higher performance. So it's interesting. Companies go through their challenges. Every company has a different challenge. So some targeted programs are important to run. At this company, they probably did need something at the lower end, but the really good managers actually are ones that can relate to everyone. And
Right.
What,
And
well, what tips would you share with a sales manager who happens to be listening about how to deal with their bottom performers?
yeah, so the behaviors totally different, and between the laggards and the stars, and the techniques you use to motivate them should be very different. There's a great parallel I can make to educational testing. Um, so stars, basically, no matter what you do, are going to succeed at the end of the year. They find a
Yep.
way,
Right.
right? And so they don't need a lot of direction to do that. In fact, the best salespeople that I've seen, if you ask them, how you're planning out, they'll have a, let's say, an annual outlook, and they'll say, well, in March, this term lease is coming up, so I need to be at this account. In September, this opportunity is going to happen, so I need to be at this account. And they sort of plan out their whole year, and they'll even start from President's Club level performance, and then work backwards. Well, what do I have to do to achieve it? And like I
Okay.
said, when I was at Xerox, we had a market that grew at 5%. I used to set President's Club level targets, and in general, they were about 160% of plan. So you get people that would like knock it out of the park they're amazing people, it's every year. It was incredible performance. So these are the planners, right? With laggards, they behave totally differently. And basically, they have a much shorter term focus. They only react to what's in front of them at the time. There's no real strategic plan. And so then you need different interventions to move them up the curve. So we have a paper, I had a paper with Doug Chung and Casey Deere a while back. And one of the things that we showed is that if you put in quarterly bonuses, the people who respond to that sort of incentive are the laggards. And basically what they're doing is that, okay, I'll plan a quarter out. I can make the quarterly targets. And if I can get them to do that, then they train themselves to be in the game at the end of the year. And so if you don't have these sort of interim incentives, and it doesn't have to be incentives, it could be any intervention that's sort of helping people to keep on focus. What happens is by June, they're so far out of the game that there's no way in hell that they're going to make their target.
And it's
Right.
easy for them to drop out at that point. It hit the eject button. Yeah.
It's exactly right. And so we see the same phenomena in education as well. Whereas if you have a year-long comprehensive exam, as like in Great Britain, they often have exams like this.
Yeah.
For people that are star students, this is no problem, because all throughout the year they keep right on track. They're learning along as they could. They're self-motivated. They develop a strategy. Great. Works for them just fine. If you take people at risk, maybe people who, first generation go to college types, or families, let's say, that have never been to college, this system doesn't work as well for them. They have to train themselves how to study. And so then actually weekly interventions where you put in quizzes, or you have, small tests at a much more frequent cadence, trains people how to study.
Yeah.
And so those interventions actually are very effective for your low performing types of students. Same phenomena. And it just gets back to orientation towards long-term planning and long-term thinking.
Yeah, you can only pull so many all-nighters in a row before you actually can.
Yeah.
Or not.
or not, as we know, right?
Yeah.
As the case may be.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about music, Tom.
Yeah, sure.
We have a couple minutes left here, and don't grimace, Kurt.
This is Tim's section usually, and he always brings in a musical one, which is really fun. But go for it. Tim.
Sometimes. But we Tom, when we were getting ready for this, you said, I'm game for talking about music. So tell me a little bit about your interest in music. Are you a big listener? Are you a player? Do you gig on the weekends? I mean, where are you on the scale of musical interest?
Yeah, I love music. I cannot say that I'm a gigger on the weekends. I wish I were. I played guitar when I was younger, but I don't have that ability. Fortunately, my kids seem to. But I love to listen to my daughter play piano. I think it's great. I like.
Nice.
Yeah, so for interests, I'd say I have very eclectic interests. I love modern classical music like Philip Glass. I was listening to that just before we started talking.
Okay.
I love jazz, like real modern jazz, like I guess it's not modern anymore, but John Laurie and the Lounge Lizards. I love that music. And I'm probably listening to a lot of um, bluegrass and country music now. And Kurt Vile too. So it's real. I like music across the whole spectrum of things.
What kind of bluegrass are you listening to? Is
Uh,
this where like Yo-Yo Ma meets Appalachian Spring with gosh, who was it? Tim, I can't remember his name. But is it that kind of bluegrass, or like are you really deep into the old style Kentucky Appalachian stuff?
Probably the more modern old stuff. So like Dave Rawlings and Gillian Welch, I think are fantastic. I love that music. It's so complex and interesting. Um, and the combination of the two are just between the voice and the guitar are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Which I think kind of blends into Americana. I mean, Dave Rollins and Gillian Welch are certainly leaving the strict confines of bluegrass behind and getting into the bending of storytelling and gospel and all kinds of things that are influencing their work. So
Yeah,
that
I think that's probably even a better description of it.
what's on your playlist right now? What you said you were listening to Philip Glass before we got together. What else will you listen to today?
That's a good question. The last like 3 weeks, I've been listening to Kurt Vile. So I'll probably listen to a little bit of that later this afternoon. Um, and Lord knows what else. I tend to become obsessive about things. And I think basically that's how anyone with a PhD works. Your mind just gets going on something. You're like, yeah, I've just got to know more about that thing, and you just think more and more about it. So, um,
I would
yeah,
agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Yes, it is. It's
there's
very,
something wrong with you if you get a PhD.
I knew it. I knew. Tom, thank you so much. I knew there was something wrong with Kurt. It's the damn PhD.
that's not the only thing that's wrong with me. So let's just make sure we got that straight. Well, Tom, this has been really good. We do want to leave with just if there were 3 tips for our listeners, and whether they be in sales or sales management or just people in general, what would be 2 or 3 tips that you would leave them with, just so that they can be better at work or better in their life, whatever that would be?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Well, one thing I'd say this is certainly with sales, is that a lot of people when they think about selling think it's a natural gift, and I really do not have that perspective at all. I tend to be amazed actually at the variety of people who are successful in selling. And there's introverts, there's extroverts. It's a really broad field, so there's lots of different places where people can be successful. But I think having a learning mindset and being open to ideas and continuing to learn, like that's something that's inherent to everyone who's successful. And I've seen companies that when they've made big transitions, the ones that sort of give their reps these learning opportunities do the best. Um, I, I've seen that over and over again. I'd say one of the things I think that relates to people in general that I probably appreciate more as I get older is how little I can read somebody else's mind. Uh, so, so with teaching, actually, I think it's really taught me this. If I've learned anything, is just to be more maybe present or take people people at face value and make no assumptions about what their motives are. There's just
Right.
lots of things that are going on with them. Um, and I think when I was young and I was teaching, I was so worried about what it said about me. And you'd never get me to say that. I'm not sure I could even recognize that in myself. But I got much better at the job when I stopped worrying about that part and could figure out what's going on in a student's head.
Right.
And just sort of having no value judgment about it. They have their own motivations. Students do, customers do, and your job is not to really have an opinion about that. It's just to help them along. That's something I appreciate more as I get older. I think it's really useful. Good managers do this. Good teachers do this. Good salespeople do this. Sort of have an ability to see where people are and help them get to the next level.
Good.
That's terrific. That's great stuff to end on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more in thinking about, we tend to oftentimes make assumptions about other people's motives, and most of the time those are based on what's going on in our own head as opposed to what's going on in their head. And so the ability to hold back from that and suspend that judgment for a bit, I think is a very powerful tool that if more people were able to do that, they'd have a much more less stressful life, but be just better results as a result of doing that. So with that, Tom, thank you so much for being on Behavioral Grooves. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Kurt and Tim. I really enjoyed this a lot. Thanks for asking me on.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavior Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our learning mindset brains.
I love that.
Love what?
Learning mindset brains.
Oh, there you go.
Get it on, dude.
I'm learning. I learn every time I interact with you, Tim.
Why do I for some reason, I'm just feeling some sense of facetiousness in that.
There might be a little bit of facetiousness there, but for the most part, I learn when I am with you. It's one of the things that I love about, spending time on this and just other times with you. So,
well, and just in the Mutual Admiration Society, I feel the same way. I do.
You didn't have to say that. This wasn't one of those plugs.
No, but it's reciprocity, so we got to keep it going. Okay, let's get back to Tom. What did you come away with from our discussion with Tom? What really struck you?
Well, the idea of a learning mindset and how important that is, particularly in new sales, and for those sales reps that have it or don't have it.
Yeah,
I think that was insightful. It's a thing that you probably could guess about intuitively and just from a gut reaction, but the fact that, hey, reps with a learning mindset perform better in new sales than people who have a performance mindset. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, Tom talked about the stars and how they start the year with a plan and they kind of map out the major milestones that they're going to be working through. And what seems to be implied in that is they're going to roll with the punches after they have this plan in place. And and it doesn't say that learning mindset can't be acquired, right? It's not only naturally and intuitive, is it? I mean, isn't a learning mindset something that you could also say, okay, I want to have a learning mindset. I want to develop it.
I think so.
I want to have that curiosity.
So I was thinking about this in comparison to Carol Dweck's growth mindset.
Yeah.
Carol Dweck talks about having a growth mindset. Started with work on kids, where they were looking at, kids with what she called a fixed mindset, basically saying, hey, I'm as intelligent or as smart as I'm going to be, and that's naturally born into me. It's my genetics. Or you have a growth mindset, which means my intelligence, my knowledge is going to be able to grow. I just need to work at it in various different things. And they did some really interesting work with kids in just how, they recognize those kids' successes. So if you have a child and they come home with an A on their report card, do you as a parent say, wow, that's great, you're so smart? Or do you say, wow, that's so great, you must have worked really hard at this?
Yeah.
That simple change in dialogue around that helped those kids who heard the, wow, you worked at it really hard, to develop this growth mindset, to have this idea that it's the work that I put in that got me the A, not the natural inclination of my brain that I'm so smart, and wow, that then impacts me. And so that changed things. There's a lot of other really cool stuff on that. However, I think with the learning mindset, I would assume, I don't know this, but I would assume that there's probably a similar way of approaching it so that you could learn it, that you can take that approach of saying, I want to learn about this, that I need to understand before I start trying to sell.
Here's a question for you. Do you think that there's some similarity between Carol Dweck's work and the way she talks about a learning mindset versus a fixed mindset, and the way Annie Duke talks about focusing on the process rather than just resulting? To say, because there's a big difference between saying I used a really good process and still the results I got were not so good. So versus just focusing completely on, oh, the results I got were good, so I must be good.
Yes, I think that's I learned something. Or at least it intrigues me about this conversation. I had never put those two together, but there's a component of that I think is spot on. I think that this element of thinking through the process for how we get to the results is similar to what a growth mindset is, because a growth mindset isn't saying you have a naturally inclination to this is how it's going to be and the results are going to be the results. It is, what's the process you're using to get to those results, and you can always improve that process.
Yeah.
So I think there's something there. That's interesting. Thank you, Tim.
Well, maybe. It might be really blah, blah, blah. Something that really struck me which is something that I just love in life, is becoming aware of biases. And in the research, Tom discovered that the customers perceived reps very differently than reps perceived themselves. Sounding to me like there's big blind spots on the rep's part, classic definition of biases, right?
Yeah.
That the reps are not really clued into how they are coming off when it comes to openness and flexibility and things like that. The customers see them very differently. And because I like becoming aware of this in my own life, right? I don't know how much it helps. And there's a lot.
We do have a lot. Both of us have a lot. So,
and I don't know how much, exactly how much. I don't have a measure for it, but I think it's important for us to become aware of these blind spots. And sales managers could then actually use this in helping develop the reps.
Yeah.
Looks like there's a blind spot here. Look, your customers all say this about you. You think this other thing about you. Let's try and remedy that.
Well, just the conversation that Tom had about, wow, it's really easy to get meetings up at the beginning when you have a new product. Right. And now on sales reps that are all excited about that.
Building up their confidence.
Right. But then when it comes to actually selling something from them, because those people were taking those meetings just to find out more information, because we are naturally curious for the most part, right?
And and the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
The customers don't want to say, well, I've got something new, and say, no, I don't want to hear about something new.
Right. Tell me the same stuff you've told me 10 times. I want to hear that.
Right. Well, you and I have been around sales reps enough and sales managers enough to know that's a big problem. Right.
Well, I think it's from a sales manager perspective, that focus on what are you doing this quarter, this month, whatever your sales reporting period is a big barrier, particularly if you go back and you look at this learning mindset being one of the key components of this. That takes time up front to really work through, ask those questions, not getting into that performance mode of asking for the sale or even trying to pitch the sale at that point. And I think that's a different mindset that managers need to take,
Yeah.
and might be a bias that they haven't. And I don't necessarily blame that frontline manager. I think that's driven by expectations
senior
up
leadership.
the line, that it just trickles down.
Yeah.
And those components. But how can you? So, what do you think? Is there a way that organizations can maybe help that help that situation? In other words, making the learning mindset more likely to happen in the field by maybe backing off on some of their goals in that first quarter?
Well, maybe one of the ways to do that is for the leadership to be more open, adaptable, and flexible,
Okay.
as opposed to being rigid and so unflinchingly compelled to go after the numbers, but to say, guess what? We've got some things happening here. We're introducing a new product. We're actually going to take time to make sure that the reps are comfortable, not only with the product knowledge, but in how they're going to investigate each of their customers. What are the questions that they're going to ask? Help them, and we're going to help the organization deal with the changes so that the reps don't have to be the change agents.
Well, is that then a component of the training that goes into this?
Yes.
And so focusing that training on some different things, not just the products and features and how it compares to your competitor,
Yeah.
right? So looking at how do you go in and find out this information? What are some probing questions that you can ask? The hard part, I think, and this, again, I'm not necessarily the expert in this, but the hard part, I think, from a sales perspective is that sales in that first year, that first 6 months, that first quarter have a strong residual impact on the success of that product in the long term. At least in pharmaceutical, I know that for a fact, that look, if you can get a great start within those first 6 months, the product is much more likely to be successful in the long run.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say delay those sales because you're getting this inquiry. So I'm wondering, again, from a timing perspective, can you have those reps be going in advance of the product being released?
And in pharmaceuticals, they're often aware of that. You know, there's a queue with
Now-
FDA approval and things like that.
Right. Now with that, there's also rules and regulations about
What
what
you
they
can-
can talk about
and what you can't.
and what you can't.
Yeah.
But I think in just general sales, I think often, companies wait until the product is out
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
or right before that, and maybe moving some of that training up, moving some of the time allocation from, obviously you still need to sell the old products or the products, the existing products, but maybe taking a time and promoting that time to your reps to say, let's take some additional moments here in advance of the product coming out to kind of understand the customer and what their needs are as it relates to what this new product is going to be able to do for them.
As well as to prepare the organization for what it's going to be like when that new product comes on the market.
Mm-hmm.
What are the accounting implications? What are the customer service and support implications? I spent a bunch of years in product management, and when new products were introduced, lots of sales reps were excited. But one of the things that Tom said that really struck me was that let the strategic account teams be the leaders in the release of the new products.
Yeah.
Because they have a broader view, and I think that's something that I saw over and over again, is that sometimes the most successful releases of new products were when a big client with a strategic account team was able to put it to use. And they were able to, the strategic account team was successful at doing that because of their long-term perspective. They had a deeper understanding of the client, and they had this broader view of how it fit into the organization.
Do you think that goals need to be adjusted in a new product given this information? Again, or just the timing of those goals. Maybe the overall goal component that we have is the same, but how those goals, how those sales come in, is there a component there that needs to be talked about?
I mean, I've never seen a sales manager underestimate where their sales forecasts. So I think that they do a really good job of setting aggressive goals that are rarely achieved, and one we could have a whole discussion around that.
I will take that back. I've seen many actually new product launches where they have just blown through the goals. They've blown through the expectations.
Wow.
Because it's a new product.
And they really did ratchet down their expectations?
No, I think what they just didn't expect that the product would be as successful as it was. And so there are many times, and again, I've done a lot of work with pharmaceutical in those instances where reps love that because that's where they're getting these massive payouts, because across the board, everybody is performing at 110, 115, 150% of goal.
Yeah.
And then they'll ratchet those goals down the next semester or quarter or year, whatever their goal allocation component is on. So,
yeah, interesting.
So what else?
The emotional side, the whole idea that I for fear of sounding like focusing on the fluff, I think that it is an interesting observation that Tom makes about how important the emotional side of being a sales rep plays into their performance. That when they're trying to save face, when they misstate or misstep, and then they're trying to backtrack, and that impacts and impedes their performance.
So the fear factor is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The element of failure. I think, again, salespeople have such a most salespeople have a very clear measure that they get rated on, which is their sales performance.
Right.
And their feeling of worth can sometimes be tied up in how well or not well that they are doing on that. And the emotional response is really strong. And the component of saying, particularly in a new product, you might be a great performer on the existing products, but all of a sudden in a new product launch and your sales numbers are at the bottom of the organization versus being at the top, that can have a significant impact.
Yeah. And while it's easy for sales managers, which I've heard over and over again, that we're going to push them, we're going to have a stack ranking, and we're going to list everybody out, and we're going to drive everybody to be the top performers because of this fear factor. Fear is not always a great motivator, especially in the long term.
Right. That's a very good point. And to that, while there are some benefits of that, there's also a lot of down turns or down factors that you could have, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Well, I have a musical question for you, Kurt.
Ding, 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 ding. Imagine that.
You're putting the sound effects in before I can even add them. I thought that our musical conversation with Tom was really fun.
Yeah.
But he brought up Kurt Weill and Kurt Weill.
Good name.
Yeah, exactly.
At least the first name.
And spelled correctly, as you might say.
I would say that, yes.
Well, Kurt Weill was a composer. He was a musical composer that didn't really work in contemporary or modern songs as much as he worked in like musicals and a variety of different things in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. He wrote Mac the Knife from the Threepenny Opera. Now, it was originally written in German, of course. The lyrics were from Bertolt Brecht, which you probably already knew, but
as I stare at you with this glazed over eyes, going, never heard of it.
But it's such an iconic song to especially people in the U.S.
Yeah,
they think about Bobby Darin or Ella Fitzgerald did these great covers of it. But it reminded me of show music, and I wanted to ask you about: are there operas or musicals that you've really gotten a lot of enjoyment out of?
So operas not so much. Musicals, yes.
Okay.
And I think there's a couple. We've talked about Hamilton before, and how my kids have just embraced Hamilton. I mean, they can sing pretty much every song without missing a beat,
Wow.
without missing a lyric.
I love that.
Like, we're in the car and they will just start singing it, and my son will go to my daughter, all right, you got the Hamilton part, I'm taking the Burr part, I'm going to do Lafayette, and you can do, I can't, now I'm drawing a blank on the others. But anyway, the fact is that is such a well done musical, both from a musical perspective, the story perspective, and we got to see it, and so the acting is just fantastic.
Well, and
too.
they will probably carry those lyrics and those stories with them for the rest of their life.
They will, and I've said this before. I love it because it all of a sudden sparked an interest in American history of the 1776 and everything
Right.
that happened around that, the beginning of our country, and so it was great, and I love that part.
So that was a very similar experience for me when Jesus Christ Superstar came out, which technically is a rock opera.
Yes, there you
technically.
go. Okay, technically it is.
Yeah.
How did that get you into history of the United States?
No, I wasn't connecting to the history of the United States.
I'm sorry.
I was connecting to the way your children are swapping parts, and that it's always available to them, because I had this with a couple of my buddies.
Yeah.
That we would do this the same thing with Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah.
But there's other musicals that you like, right?
On that, I will tell you, my wife talks about Grease was hers.
Okay,
And
exactly.
So, that's a different thing. I think there's other, like you talk about rock opera, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this actually I don't think ever was a rock opera, but Tommy from The Who, right?
Pretty darn close to a rock opera.
I mean,
Yeah.
what constitutes a rock opera? Why is it an opera? What
When there's no spoken word, that's really the simplest definition. A musical has narrative and dialogue and songs, whereas an opera doesn't have any spoken word.
So Hamilton actually is almost an opera, then.
Right. It really is.
I mean, because the entire thing
Is sung.
Is sung.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and then so what about, did you listen to Tommy or the Who?
Oh
Was
yeah,
that any of
Tommy.
your-
Oh yeah, and Pink Floyd's "The Wall."
The Wall.
Another brick in the wall. Yeah, I loved it.
Get your English accent on that.
It's terrible, isn't it? It's horrible.
So now The Wall is one of my favorite of all time.
Would you like to try your British accent on
Oh,
that?
hell no. Hell no. But yeah, and the movie was just fantastic.
Yeah, did you like it? Did you think?
I
yeah?
did. I saw it in high school. It was one of those weird enough things that just was out there that I think I went and saw it actually in the movie theaters more than once, which I didn't do. That wasn't me. So I went out and watched it.
Were you a big Pink Floyd fan to start with?
I was a relatively big Pink Floyd fan.
Oh.
But I think the story behind The Wall, right? That, again, it gets into psychology. I mean, if you think about The Wall,
Oh yeah, yeah.
it is all about the self-psychology of a kid losing his father in the war and what that meant growing up, and building his relationship with his mother, and building a wall around himself to protect him and not letting people in, and how do you tear that wall down? It's fantastic. Maybe that's what got me interested in psychology.
Which to me is all about Roger Waters' dystopian view of the world.
Well, there you go. I mean, he definitely has that viewpoint,
Yeah.
and so I think that was great.
Yeah, I had a hard time with Pink Floyd after Animals.
Did you?
Yeah. So early albums, man, I was
Well,
just
that's your genre.
well.
I mean, come on. It
It just got weird with Animals, but so what? Okay.
come on.
Okay.
Money. I mean, is that after?
No,
Dark
that-
Side of the Moon is before Animals.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
all right.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, should we wrap up with a thank you to all of our listeners?
Yeah. Well, thank you, listeners. We appreciate you listening. Hopefully, you're still listening at this point and haven't just turned us off. So,
Yeah. Hopefully not. And so reach out. let us know what you're thinking about. Let us know what's important to you, and if we can be of any help to you.
At T. Houlihan on Twitter, and at What Motivates at Twitter. On Twitter, at Twitter, whatever it is.
Something like that.
All right. Well, with that,
Keep on grooving.